Welcome to the Choose Love podcast, a show that chronicles the extraordinary love of ordinary people. Our hope is that these stories will inspire us all to hashtag choose love. The podcast is presented by Elle and Adira, your digital bridesmaid. We're here to take your squad moments to the next level and help curate your bridal style so that you can focus on love. I'm Eddie Weisfeld. We all remember our first love. You fall head over heels for someone. Nothing else in the world matters except that one person. It's a brand new feeling. You don't ever want it to end. But it's a two-part story. And what comes right along with your first love is your first heartbreak. It isn't pretty or as magical as the first part of the story, but it's inevitable and just part of growing up. Everyone has got to go through it at some point. Today we hear the love chronicle of Kris and Steve Beall, a couple who went through just that. But don't tune out just yet, because there's a third act to this particular story.
Christine Beall.
That's Kris. She's one of my mother's oldest friends. I've heard countless stories about the two of them growing up in the small town of Hudson, Ohio. But when I heard this story, it made me perk up and listen a little closer than usual.
And Steve Beall.
That's Steve. He works in sales and marketing and has a passion for closing a deal. He also grew up in Hudson, but was a little older than my mother and Kris, so he would usually hang around with my uncle. One day back in the summer of 1982, their paths would collide and neither of their lives would ever be the same.
I'm sitting with your mother, actually, on your grandparents' front porch on Atterbury Boulevard, and up drives this car, and this guy gets out of the car and walks in the house, and I look at your mom and say, "Oh my gosh, Kelly, who is that guy? He's so cute." And your mom says, "Oh my gosh, that's like my other brother. That's Neil's best friend, Steve." And I asked her if he was going to be at the party that evening, and she said, "Oh, I'm sure he is." And I said, "Oh, will you tell him I think he's cute?" And your mom said, "Oh, yes." So now I have to stop because I went home, and then your mom went in the house.
So, Eddie, I pulled up in a gold Dodge Charger, 1974, I think is what it was. And I just got off my dad's roof. I was re-roofing the house for the summer. I was between my last quarter of college. I was going to finish up in the fall. And I was pretty grimy and dirty coming off the roof and heading over to the Neil's to grab a beer and see what he was doing. I think they was using a party at the Sullivan house. So I stopped in and I saw your mom and Kris sitting on the front porch and said hi to Kelly and walked in the house and was waiting for Neil, whatever he was doing. And Kelly approached me and said, "You know my friend Kris?" And I'm like, "Yeah." "She thinks you're cute. Want to know if you're going to be at the party tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be at the party tonight." So Kelly disappeared. Neil came downstairs, and I really wasn't going to go home and get cleaned up. I was just going to hang out there for the party. And based on this conversation, I said, "Neil, you know what? I think I'm going to go home and take a shower." So I went home, took a shower, and tried to look my best, and came back to the party.
The rest is kind of history.
Well, actually, during the party, I'm sure you know something called quarters.
The game.
There was a game of quarters in your grandmother's kitchen, and we were all playing. And I was sitting next to Kris, and before I knew it, everybody had left the kitchen except the two of us. And so I turned to her and I asked if I could kiss her. And she said yes.
I said yes.
And so I gave her a kiss. And that's how the whole thing started.
The rest is history. We were together for 2 years after that.
It was love at first sight. Life was good at this point. They fell hard for each other and quickly began to dream of their future together, planning their lives around one another. But life always seems to rear its ugliest head at these points. And that is exactly what happened to Kris and Steve.
I was a little younger, he was a little older, and I was going to college, and I went to Miami, and he was getting his master's at Kent State. So, yeah.
They tried to make it work the best they could, making trips to see one another whenever they had time.
Well, we dated for a couple of years, and I made the trek from Kent State down to Oxford.
A lot
of times in the winter, back when we used to have winter. So it was quite challenging. And,
But the distance caused us problems. Eventually, it got to be too much. They were at different stages in their lives now, different people from when they first met. Things just were not the same anymore. So, they decided to call it quits.
I was young. Yeah.
She got involved in other things, and I was trying to finish up my degree and start thinking about a career. And, time slipped by, and we kind of went our separate ways. And she went off to do her thing, and I went off to do mine, and didn't communicate other than seeing her maybe once or twice at someone's wedding.
Life went on after they split apart. They both finished school and grew into their adult lives. They both eventually settled down and got married to other people and started having their own families.
And so a mutual friend thought I would like someone that she introduced me to, and it was sort of, that time in life, and so one thing led to another, and we got married. And from there, I worked on my career extensively and had my son Drew, and unfortunately, as some things happen in life, eventually we kind of grew apart and ended up in divorce.
And then on my end, obviously, I met somebody at Miami and married, had my son, and then, unfortunately, divorce happens, and ended up alone, and that was it.
The story could end here. They both could have just continued their lives and never spoken to each other again, keeping one another as a mere memory from their past. Young love ends this way all the time. People meet and fall in love when they're young, but that love rarely grows to its potential. But that's not what happened, because this isn't just a story about young love. This is a story about true love, and true love will always find a way. Through circumstance and a little help from Facebook, Steve and Kris were able to find each other again.
I was vice president of marketing for an international firm, and I had Facebook was just coming online at the time, and a lot of people were talking to me about the marketing aspects of Facebook, and so I set up a Facebook account and really wasn't quite sure how it all worked. It was kind of hunting and pecking through Facebook, and this whole friend people stuff, and I friended your mom, and I friended some other folks that I knew. And as things went along, as you probably know, Facebook offers up friend suggestions. And so one of the friend suggestions popped up was Kris. And I was kind of shocked when I saw that. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I kind of sat on it for a while, and then I sent out a friend request. I clicked on it and didn't know what was going on in her life and waited.
And then I answered and said, wow, why after all these years? And from there, it was kind of chit-chatting on Facebook, and then our respective lives had changed, and then it was, do you want to have a cup of coffee?
Now, it wasn't perfect. Things didn't just fall right back into place. But like I said before, Steve has a passion to close the deal.
So I invited her to coffee, and she said no.
Yeah, I absolutely said absolutely not.
And so since she wouldn't accept my offer for coffee, I sent her a Keurig machine. And I said, when you finally come around to having coffee with me, you can use this machine to have coffee.
Mm-hmm. So, and my friends now call him, or well, at the time, called him the coffee guy.
So eventually she agreed to have coffee with me because one of her friends pestered her into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we had coffee because I'm like, what? I mean, if I agree to have coffee with you, what are we going to talk about? And we had coffee, and that was okay. Then he asked me on a date, a real date.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We went to dinner, and that's kind of, then here we are.
Things fell right back into place.
Yeah, like we had never. Yeah.
In a little more mature aspect of our lives.
Yes, because I was mature and older now.
All these years later, and their love for each other never left. The flame may have shrunk for a long time, but it never went out. Steve knew he never wanted to lose his opportunity to spend the rest of his life with Kris. So he finally decided that it was time to make it official and get married. So
we've been dating probably a couple years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not perfect on dates. And I decided I wasn't going to let this moment get away from me again, because when we first met, she didn't want to go to college. She wanted to get married. Mm-hmm. And actually, her folks called me up to help convince her to go to college. Mm-hmm. So I knew that would probably be the end of our relationship back then, and it was. But to me and her parents, it was the right thing to do. So this time around, I'm like, you know what? this stage of our life, I don't certainly need to ask permission of anybody. So I arranged a long weekend at the island of St. Croix, and she thought it was all about her birthday.
And I told all my friends, oh, you take me for my birthday. My 50th birthday, isn't this sweet?
So that was not my intention.
No.
So we got to St. Croix, and as soon as we got there, I'm like, hey, let's get in some casual clothes, and that gave me a chance to set the mood in the room.
Yep.
And she came out, and I'm a big top 10 guy.
Uh-huh.
So I had written the top 10 reasons to marry me.
And of course, I still didn't even know then.
Went through my top 10 and then got down on one knee. And she still didn't quite understand what was going on.
Right.
And I proposed, and I didn't get a yes, Eddie.
No. I'm like, what?
I got a what?
What?
And
Are you serious?
I'm like, okay, this isn't what I expected this when I practiced this.
No.
But she obviously said yes.
I did. And
that's how it all happened.
yeah, that was it.
Kris and Steve tied the knot in January of 2019. In doing so, they made a few promises to each other.
Well, I know that my vows, I'd have to read them to you, Eddie, because there's no way I could memorize them all. But in there, I talked about the fact that lightning can really strike twice. It struck when I met her at the Solomon household that first night, and it struck again when I had coffee with her. And there's just feelings in your life where it's right and it's the right person. And so a lot of it was around losing the opportunity some 30 years ago and making sure I didn't lose it again.
And mine were just promising to love and honor and cherish forever and ever.
Chris's vows, like mine, were very, very much related to the past and then brought into the present.
Right.
Because it was such a dichotomy. We were very much in love back then, and just circumstance
Timing.
didn't allow it.
Timing.
And so this time we weren't going to let it slip away.
Yeah.
Now, their love story continues, but this time, they'll finish it together. Thank you so much to Kris and Steve Beall for sharing their wonderful story with us. The show is presented by Elle and Idira, your digital maid of honor and bridal style consultant. The mission of E&A is to help elevate your squad moments and curate your bridal style so that you can focus on love. All the music for the show was provided by purpleplanet.com. Like the podcast? Make sure to share it with your friends. The show is available on all major podcast providers. This is the Choose Love Podcast. I'm Eddie Weisfeld, and thank you for listening.